You're sitting at home on a completely ordinary Tuesday. You feel fine, nothing unusual, and your dog won't leave you alone. They keep pressing their nose against the same spot on your leg over and over. They follow you from room to room. They sleep against you that night instead of their usual spot on the floor. You tell yourself they're just being clingy. 3 weeks later, you're in a doctor's office and they're explaining what they found on the scan. You think about your dog. You think about that Tuesday. And you wonder whether they were trying to tell you something. So the question is, did they actually know? Or were you just looking for meaning in something that had none? Let's start with what dogs can physically detect, because the answer is more unsettling than most people are ready for. When cells become cancerous, their metabolism changes. That change produces specific volatile organic compounds, microscopic molecules that enter the bloodstream, move through tissue, and eventually reach the surface of the skin and the breath. To you, they're completely undetectable. To a dog's nose, they are a signature as distinct as a fingerprint. A dog's nose contains around 300 million olfactory receptors. Humans have about 6 million. The region of their brain dedicated to processing smell is proportionally 40 times larger than yours. Dogs can detect a concentration of 1 part per trillion. That is equivalent to a single drop of liquid diluted across 20 Olympic swimming pools. When something changes in your body chemistry, your dog doesn't vaguely sense something is different. They read it like a document. In 2019, researchers presented trained detection dogs with breath samples from confirmed lung cancer patients and healthy controls. The dogs identified the cancer samples with 97% accuracy, not after symptoms appeared, not after a scan revealed anything, from breath alone collected from people who in some cases hadn't yet received their own diagnosis. But the more unsettling evidence doesn't come from laboratories. It comes from people who had no idea what their dog was reacting to and only understood it afterward. Dozens of documented cases collected by researchers across the United States and United Kingdom follow the same pattern. Dog fixates on a specific area of the body. Owner dismisses it. Diagnosis follows weeks or months later, localized to exactly the area the dog wouldn't stop investigating. The skeptic's argument is straightforward. Maybe the dogs were responding to behavioral changes in their owners, stress, altered movement, unconscious signs that something was wrong. Maybe they weren't detecting disease at all, just a person who already sensed something was off and was showing it without realizing. That's a fair argument, except it doesn't explain the pre-symptomatic cases, the people who felt completely fine, who had no anxiety to project, no behavioral changes to read, no knowledge of any illness at all. The dog knew before the person did. There was no signal to follow, just chemistry. But no animal has produced evidence as precise, as documented, and as genuinely difficult to explain as a small gray cat named Oscar. Oscar lived at the Steerhouse Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Providence, Rhode Island. In 2007, his behavior was formally documented in a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine by geriatrician David Dosa. Over several years, Oscar had developed a pattern. When a patient was within hours of dying, Oscar would walk to their room, jump onto the bed, and curl up beside them. He would stay until they died, then leave. Staff initially noticed it by accident. They began tracking it deliberately. By the time the paper was published, Oscar had accurately predicted more than 25 deaths. The number eventually exceeded 50. He was wrong so rarely that the nursing home began notifying families when Oscar chose a patient, because his presence had become a more reliable indicator than the clinical assessment of the medical team. Oscar showed no particular interest in patients who were seriously ill but not actively dying. He didn't seek out pain or distress in general. He sought out something specific that occurred in the final hours of life, something the medical equipment in the building wasn't detecting. And he found it with a consistency that no statistical model could attribute to chance. Horses present a different dimension of this entirely. In 2018, researchers at the University of Sussex found that horses could read human facial expressions and cross-reference them with vocal tone in real time, detecting inconsistencies between what a human's face showed and what their voice communicated. But what researchers studying human-horse interaction have documented more recently goes further. Horses show measurable physiological responses, elevated heart rate, altered breathing, increased cortisol, in response to the proximity of humans with serious illness, even when those humans showed no visible symptoms and the horse had no prior experience with them. They have spent 6,000 years alongside humans. Some researchers believe they have developed a sensitivity to human physiology that functions almost like a diagnostic instrument, scanning the body the way they would read another horse in a herd, searching for signs of change that matter to the survival of the group. And then there are elephants. Elephants have been documented responding to the death of humans they had formed bonds with in ways that go beyond simple behavioral explanation. They return to the locations where humans they knew died, sometimes years later, and display the same behaviors they show at elephant death sites, standing quietly, touching the ground with their trunks, remaining in place for extended periods. In 2016, researchers documented a group of elephants in Kenya gathering at the home of a conservationist who had worked alongside them for decades. The night he died, before any human had traveled to inform anyone in the surrounding area of his death. They had not seen him in months. Something reached them that wasn't visible behavior, wasn't a sound, wasn't any cue that current science can fully account for. So why would evolution produce this at all? Detecting death in others is expensive as a behavior. It takes time. It interrupts other activities. It requires processing complexity that has no obvious immediate benefit to the detecting animal. But in social species, knowing when a member of the group is close to dying carries real survival value. It allows the group to adjust, to redistribute roles, to prepare for what comes next. In prey species, proximity to a dying animal signals danger, a predator nearby, a disease spreading through the group. The ability to detect the chemical and physiological signatures of dying didn't evolve as compassion, it evolved as information. And over millions of years, for certain species living in close contact with humans, that information system became specifically tuned to us. But here is where the science stops being enough. Because none of this explains what it means that Oscar walked into that room. We can identify the volatile organic compounds. We can measure the olfactory receptors. We can track the behavioral response across dozens of studies. What we cannot do is get inside Oscar's experience and determine whether anything is happening there that resembles what you feel when you sit with someone you love who is dying. Some researchers think asking that question is a category error, that we're projecting human interiority onto creatures that simply don't have it. Others argue that refusing to ask it is its own kind of assumption, that consciousness, that something like awareness, is exclusively ours. The honest answer is that nobody knows, and the fact that nobody knows doesn't make the answer no. What we do know is this. Your dog pressed their nose against your leg on an ordinary Tuesday, detected a molecular signature you couldn't perceive, and stayed close to you in the only way they knew how to respond to what they were reading, whether that required anything resembling understanding from the inside, or whether it was a cascade of evolved chemistry that just happens to produce the same result, the outcome was the same. Something was happening in your body. They knew. Maybe the most important question isn't whether they understand what death is. Maybe it's what it means that across dozens of species, across millions of years of evolution, the instinct to stay close to a body that is changing, to press against it, to refuse to leave it, kept being passed down. It kept surviving. Whatever that is, it found you before you found it. Not a fact you can frame, not a certainty you can hold. Just an animal that knew something was wrong and decided, without language, without explanation, that the right response was to stay.